Hello, I'm Tony, and today I'm going to do a roundup of all the free games available in June 2022 on the Amazon Games Launcher. These titles are free if you have Prime Gaming, so here's a one-stop shop for you to find out if any of them interest you. The first game I'm going to be talking about is called Across the Grooves. Like many of the games that Amazon Gaming are giving away, Across the Grooves is not actually a game, it's an interactive novel. It was released in 2020 and features the use of music to move the story along in certain places. Weirdly, the music was actually turned off by default when I started the game, so bear that in mind if you start playing and can't hear it. Now, I'm not going to get into the story too much, as that's the whole point of watching an interactive novel, but I will explain that you start making decisions for a main character called Alice. You find out that strange things are afoot very quickly, and the rest of the plot is to uncover a mystery involving an ex-partner called Ulysses. Now, as you can see from the video playing, the art has a watercolour effect, which I was kind of ambivalent to. It was fine. You may well really enjoy that, and this is indicative of the whole thing. So if you like the art style, you're probably going to enjoy this. The sound is not just music. There are scenes, for example, of a bar where there's just a talking and general noise you'd expect in a bar, and it does add a little bit to the story itself. It adds a bit of atmosphere that the non-moving background guys can't really add themselves. The choices in the game that you're given are meant to add an extra element to the story, but to be honest, they're a little inconsistent. Some choices do have notable consequences, though there is a set ending that you can't deviate from. So what you can do is you can slightly change your path in getting to the end. The decisions you make can affect the way you follow through on the story, so it can take you down sort of side alleys of the story, introducing new characters and catching up with them at the end of the game. Or a decision could completely skip substantial parts of the playthrough. In my second playthrough, I chose a different option that basically skipped about 10 to 15 minutes. There's a few of these, and they do have a significant effect, and looking at the achievements that the game catalogues, there's obviously a number of permutations that you can play. There's a bunch of choices as well that will just give you a couple of extra pages worth of dialogue. These are generally inconsequential things. They're things like choosing to talk to one person in front of another just cuts off a short conversation with one of those people. Unfortunately, there's a fair number of choices where it makes absolutely no difference. Literally, in fact, it ignores what you said and does the other thing instead. So what was the point of asking me? Those situations feel very frustrating. From the music side of things, I was a little bit let down. I don't know if this would just be me. Other people might well enjoy the music, but the instrumental part of the songs were pretty good. The vocals, however, were as if they were reading what we should be reading, but singing it instead. There are times when the lyrics got a bit more poetic and it felt like a song. Unfortunately, some of the dialogue in both the song and the normal narrative was a bit clunky. For me, a couple of things detracted a little bit. There were a few scenarios that seemed strange. The phrasing about characters and Alice's feelings towards them kind of came out of nowhere, were extremely exaggerated in ways that could have been better. The story was fine. It was interesting enough that I did want to see the end. Not twice though. And unfortunately the mystery seemed apparent pretty early on. Now, this title was not aimed at me at all. I mean, I'm not interested that much in interactive novels anyway, but it was relatively engaging apart from the problems I've talked about. There was a couple of romance options which a lot of people would like, and anyone with really good knowledge of 60s and 70s music, particularly rock and psychedelic, will love the numerous references to tracks, albums and artists. Unfortunately for me, they went right over my head. The story is like between 2 and 3 hours, I'd say, depending on what choices you make. And I guess the achievements do kind of encourage people to replay it. Unfortunately, it won't encourage me to replay it. It's just not my cup of tea. I didn't mind drinking it, but I won't be ordering it again. Our next game is Astrologaster. Astrologaster is something of a historical drama, based around the real-life Dr. Simon Foreman, and his strange life. You are Simon Foreman, and you're a practicing but not licensed doctor in the 16th century, using astrology and your own logical thinking to diagnose patients and sometimes advise them, and sometimes to get to know them really well. You are hoping to get 8 letters of recommendation from patients to get a licence, and so are best advised to give them the answers they want, rather than the more accurate one. The story is presented as a storybook, complete with page turns to move onwards to the next scene, which is quite nice. Cut-out drawings represent the characters, some of them real historical figures, though they could all be. My 16th century English history is pretty sparse, and they are all voice acted really well. Each scene is introduced by an era-appropriate song, usually funny, relating to the patient. I mean, these are well done, they're well sung, the music itself is great. The voice acting cast are genuinely talented and add a lot to the characters and the story itself. The scene plays out, adding historical context as well as information about the patient's problems that they need to be solved by consultation with the stars. 2 or 3 options will be available, giving clues to which one is accurate via a number of readings that can be clicked on to provide more detailed information. However, all of this is a bit unnecessary, as the main body of the option gives plenty of information, more than enough to diagnose it. Also, accurate diagnosis is really against your best interests, since the patient's happiness with the diagnosis will increase their regard for you, moving them towards writing one of the 8 letters of recommendation you need. If they are unhappy with your diagnosis or advice, you'll lose progress towards that, though making them unhappy and being right will more or less cancel each other out. They do return several times each, so you do get many options to kind of get to that 100%. In my playthrough, I made a fair few patients unhappy, but still managed to get to the 8 letters of recommendation without too much of an issue. Honestly, after an hour and a half, I just stopped caring about the story. I just wanted to finish the game and get my 8 letters. Too many decisions made no real difference, and the very wordy 16th century form of address really started to grate on me. It also felt like some story elements happened completely out of the blue, which was probably done to line up with the real Simon Foreman's actual life. But it did add a little bit to the element of feeling of not being in any kind of control whatsoever. In my playthrough, despite making choices randomly, since I just didn't care, I managed to finish the game in about 2.5 hours. Now, for anyone interested in 16th century London, or history in general, or the very interesting story of an astrological doctor at that time, you'll probably get quite a lot from this game. Probably will enjoy it. It's very much helped by the humour and the acting and music that's throughout the game. It's amazing how much voice acting they actually recorded. It's just a bit of a shame that the gameplay elements aren't as compelling as that. But you know what? As a free game, I did enjoy the first hour or so. So if any of these elements appeal to you that I've mentioned, and you're an Amazon Prime member, obviously, it could give you a few hours of very well presented, quite funny entertainment. Our next free game is Calico, where you are the new owner of a slightly run-down cat cafe, though I have no idea what a cat cafe really is. You have a whole town to explore and a couple of areas that are clearly blocked, that you'll need to remove the obstacles to investigate the rest of the world. It's a very cutesy game, which initially made me think of Animal Crossing, especially since the characters speak like this. That's my impression anyway. Unfortunately, the quality and the polish is nowhere near New Horizon. Character creator is pretty extensive, and I will show now my usual carefully considered approach to defining who I want to be in this new world. The game itself consists primarily of fetch quests, effectively, for the various NPCs that live in a nearby town, as you're not able to make many changes to your cafe without any money, and you start with pretty much no money. Doing the quest rewards you with money, recipes, so you can make different food types, and furniture for your cafe. Now, talking of furniture, the furniture placement feature is, let's be really nice and say, clunky, as opposed to crap. When you're placing stuff and you move towards a wall, the wall will disappear. There's no snapping, there's nothing like that. Walls disappear, and it's kind of hit and miss if you want to put something on a wall. The area inside is pretty small too, so it kind of limits the freedom that you have, and you do have to place some furniture for various quests and for the NPCs to be able to sit in your cafe. Now, I've only played for about 3 hours, so you might get the option to expand these things, I don't know, but I've not seen any indication that that's the case so far. As I said, the quests are fetch quests primarily, but there's a story behind them, and you do get to know the NPCs, so they get a bit of character, and you're taught about the various relationships between them, so it does feel a little bit more alive than just saying fetch quests would suggest. Unfortunately, they are pretty much fetch quests. They are go here, get this, come back, and there is nothing to do when you're travelling across the map. So there's animals around the map that you can interact with. You've got various toys where you can play games with them. You can pet them or you can pick them up. Once you've picked them up, you can basically tell them to follow you, go to your cafe to live there, or roam free, just in case you did tell them to follow you. However, you can only have 10 animals at the cafe at one time, and a number of quests do require you to send an animal to your cafe, so you do need some free spots. So there's not normally much point interacting with the animals, so there's literally nothing to do when travelling. There's nothing to interact with, there's no collecting, mining, anything like that to be done. So it does make the travelling in between completing quests a bit duller than normal. What isn't dull is the food making process in your kitchen, or at least it is the first time that you try to make a dish. It's annoying. Rather than simply make a food item from a recipe, you are shrunk down and you need to pick up the now oversized ingredients and throw them into a mixing bowl. You then jump in the mixing bowl once the item's been created, pick it up, jump out and throw it onto a serving tray. Now, the game has a lot of clipping issues. There's poor collision detection, there's general clipping when you're near objects, and there's characters clipping into things constantly. On the crowded kitchen worktop, this happens quite a lot, and actually throwing the ingredients in isn't that easy, it's not that straightforward. So it just makes the whole process incredibly frustrating when you can't see what you're doing, you try to throw an item in the bowl, and you have to spend another 30 seconds running after it, running back and trying again. I don't see what this adds to the game. I actually think it makes the game more frustrating. In the starting area, a really nice tune plays and never ever stops. This would be fine if it had a longer loop length, but the loop length is actually quite short and the music itself is quite repetitive, so it tends to get pretty boring. As I mentioned earlier, the game has a real lack of polish and it shows in so many different areas. The core of a cutesy game where you speak to NPCs, get somewhat involved in their various issues in life and create a cafe and build something up is there. I spent 3 hours in the game. I'm happy to go back and do more if it wasn't for these issues. Poor AI, terrible clipping issues, and an overall lack of detailing in the rest of the world to make it interesting. As it is, it may be your thing. If you want a somewhat knockoff Animal Crossing New Horizons crossed with a simple RPG, give this a try. There is something there. Our next game is Escape from Monkey Island, which is an old game. It was released in 2000, so I don't quite know why it's being released here, except for the fact that a new game in the franchise is being developed. I wonder if that's something to do with it. The game's age does show, particularly in the control systems in the game. You play as Guybrush Threepwood, the protagonist from the previous games, though this isn't the same type of point-and-click adventure I got frustrated with when I was younger. Instead, you control the character movement in a really imprecise way, using the arrow keys to turn and move backwards and forwards like a tank. Interactable objects will appear in a list that you can highlight with the page up and page down keys. See what I mean about old-fashioned controls? Also, escape doesn't bring the menus up like you'd expect. F1 does. I think that's because old PCs and home computers didn't have escape keys from what I remember. Back in the day. The plot's revealed via loads of comedic situations and dialogue, and the bare bones of the story are that you're married to the governor of the island that you live on, who has been declared dead due to your previous adventures in the series, and you now need to help her reclaim her livingness and win back governorship of the island. As with all the games in the series, you need to find, pick up and then use items on interactable objects in order to solve the puzzles that stand in your way. Though unfortunately, these are a little unforgiving. For example, the order that you speak to certain NPCs is important. Interacting with the wrong person or object first can lead to a lot of backtracking, something I remember not liking much from the original games. Obviously I can't talk about the story too much or show too much gameplay because, spoilers. And the value in the game is solving the puzzles and watching the story unfold. Oh, and the comedy. It's like a fourth wall breaking, pop culture kind of comedy. And you might benefit from playing the previous games as there will be callbacks to those, as well as knowing what was happening in the year 2000. The whole game is voice acted and the music is pretty good, which does add to the atmosphere of the game as a whole. I did find the control system in this game really fiddly, and it did get in the way a little bit, obviously because of its age. I'm also not massively into the trial and error game style, where you have to use every object on every other object in every order you can think of, and you've got to go back and retry all of those things because you may have unlocked an option that wasn't there previously. I'm not keen on those games that much. I only spent an hour in the game. I got through a few of the first puzzles, but I don't really have any drive to continue, even though these games are rightfully considered classics. Maybe things have moved on a little bit too much, but for people that like puzzle games and can get used to the archaic control system, it's a really well written and engaging game if you like that type of game. If you're not sure if you do like that type of game, because you've not really played one, and you have Amazon Prime, give it a go. See if it's the kind of thing you like. This month's last free game is World Rallycross 8, or WRC8 for short, which was a bit tricky for me to review. Now, my laptop, which I bought about 6 years ago for work, is not a gaming PC. It plays most of the games I want to play okay with its GTX 1050 Ti graphics card, but not so much with WRC8. Even at the lowest settings, the game had terrible FPS, to the point that it was actually painful to move around the menus in the game, which is strange since I wouldn't expect that to be particularly taxing. I did play a few stages, which showcased my poor driving skills, but I really couldn't recover from any kind of collisions or slides, as I'd end up overcompensating because the FPS just wasn't telling me what was happening. And that's my excuse and I am sticking to it. So this review is kind of just going to be an FYI for those wanting to test the game out, to make sure they have a decent PC to play it on. I mean, it's not hard to have a better gaming PC than mine, but since I'm playing free games because I can't afford to upgrade it, I guess others are in the same position, so this is kind of an FYI to them. Now, what I did play, the racing did feel more realistic than the general racer that I tend to play. Collisions did damage the car, and that damage had serious consequences on the performance, up to the point where it was too damaged to continue. There's a career mode, which involves hiring staff, and a skill tree based system that allows you to upgrade the team's performance or earnings, loads of different things. The first upgrade you're actually forced to pick provides you with the ability to hire meteorologists, for example, so you get weather reports. Gives you a bit more information when you're racing. Now, before I switched all the high performance stuff off on the graphics, they look great, though I don't have something like the new Forza Horizon game to compare it to. Couldn't tell you what it played like since I couldn't even play it when everything was switched to low or off. It does look like there's a good game here, so any racers, particularly those that prefer more realistic games, should definitely try this one out if you have Prime and about 20 gig of space to spare. Unfortunately, I can't comment too much on it because for me it was slow to the point of being unplayable, as I'm sure you've been able to see from the footage I've been playing in the background. Racers with half decent PCs, give it a try. That's all of the games released in June 2020 free on the Amazon Games launcher. I hope it was of some help to someone. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.